He thought I was a lonely widow until the lawyer read my will. I never thought I'd outsmart a con man at 62, but desperation makes you sharper than grief ever could. I met Alan at the church charity dinner 6 months after my husband passed. He had that kind of easy confidence that makes you feel seen again after years of being invisible. I remember laughing, really laughing for the first time since the funeral. He told me I had eyes that carried stories, and my cheeks burned like I was 16 again. At 62, I didn't expect to blush like a schoolgirl. But I did. The loneliness had carved out something hollow inside me, and Alan's attention filled it like warm water. When he asked if I believed in second chances, I said yes without thinking. I thought grief had made me wise, taught me to recognize what mattered. But grief had actually made me vulnerable. And vulnerable people make mistakes that cost everything. He started visiting every evening, always with a small gift. Flowers that smelled too sweet. Homemade pie with perfect crust. Once, even a wind chime that sang in the breeze. He called me Maggie. No one had done that since my husband died. It felt intimate, like he'd known me forever. He fixed my garden gate that had hung crooked for months. He read my late husband's old mystery novels and told me about losing his own wife to cancer 5 years ago. We bonded over grief, trading stories of loss like precious currency. He understood my pain, or so I thought. I didn't know then that his grief was borrowed, stolen from someone else's life and worn like a costume. We sat on my porch every evening, and I felt less alone. 3 months later, over tea in my kitchen, he proposed. No ring sat between us, just his trembling hand reaching across the table and watery eyes that looked sincere. "I know it's soon, Maggie," he said, voice shaking. "But life's short. We've both lost so much. Let's not waste another minute being alone." I said yes because for the first time in years, I felt chosen again. Wanted. Valuable. My daughter had warned me it was too fast, but I told her she didn't understand loneliness. I told her Alan was different, special, sent by fate. God, I was such a fool. But when you've been invisible for months, when your own children treat you like fragile glass, someone seeing you as a woman again feels like salvation. I didn't see the trap closing around me. Alan insisted we merge our finances, just for simplicity, he said. "You've worked all your life, Maggie. Managing accounts, paying bills, handling numbers. Let me take care of that burden now. You deserve rest." His voice was so gentle, so patient. I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the bank papers, something small whispering warnings I couldn't quite hear. But Alan smiled and squeezed my shoulder. I signed my name on dotted lines, transferring access to accounts I'd built over decades of careful saving. When the banker smiled wide and said, "Congratulations," I thought he meant the engagement. Now I realize he meant my surrender. I just handed a stranger the keys to everything I owned. And I walked out of that bank feeling cared for instead of robbed. Little things started going missing like smoke disappearing in wind. First, my pearl earrings, the ones my mother gave me on my wedding day. Then a silver picture frame that had sat on the mantel for 20 years. When I asked, Alan's explanation came smooth as honey. "I took them to be cleaned, darling. Wanted them to sparkle for you." The air around me began to feel thinner, like he was slowly siphoning away my oxygen. When my daughter visited, she watched Alan through narrowed eyes. After he left, she whispered, "Mom, something's off about him. I can feel it." I defended him with fire in my voice. Called her paranoid, ungrateful, jealous. God, how foolish I was. How completely blind love had made me to the thief sleeping in my bed. I logged into my bank app one quiet morning, coffee cooling beside my laptop. The numbers glowing on the screen didn't make sense. A large withdrawal stared back at me, $15,000 labeled, investment transfer. My heart dropped into my stomach like a stone. Alan brushed it off when I showed him, waving his hand dismissively. "Just moving things into higher interest accounts, sweetheart. Trust me. I'm making your money work harder." His voice carried such certainty, such casual confidence. I wanted desperately to believe him. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The dread sat on my chest like a weight, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. Something was wrong. Deep in my bones, I knew it. But knowing and admitting are two very different things. Alan brought wine that evening, red and expensive-looking in a bottle I didn't recognize. To us, he toasted, raising his glass with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I sipped and immediately tasted something wrong. Too sweet. Too thick. Strange aftertaste coating my tongue like syrup. The living room tilted sideways. Alan's voice faded into meaningless static. I remember the couch rising up to meet me, the ceiling spinning like a carousel. When consciousness returned hours later, my purse lay open on the floor, contents scattered like crime scene evidence. My debit card was missing. So was $60 from my wallet. Alan slept peacefully beside me, snoring softly. That's when something inside me finally cracked open. The scared, trusting widow died that night. Someone sharper replaced her. My late husband's wedding band disappeared next. The gold ring that had circled his finger for 40 years, that I'd kept in a velvet box by my bedside, gone. When I confronted Alan with tears streaming down my face, his explanation came quick and rehearsed. I took it to resize for you, darling. Wanted you to wear it as a necklace pendant. Surprise gift. I nodded, smiled, played the grateful fool. But inside, something snapped clean in two. This woman who'd once managed an entire company's accounting department suddenly felt very, very stupid. And angry. The anger burned hotter than any grief I'd known. That afternoon, while Alan ran errands, I picked up my phone. My hands didn't shake anymore. I called Mr. Reynolds, my late husband's attorney. I need help, I said simply. And I need it quietly. Mr. Reynolds listened in his oak-paneled office without judgment, without interruption. When I finished my story, he leaned back in his leather chair and spoke quietly, like sharing dangerous secrets. Maggie, you can't outshout men like Alan. They're too practiced at volume, at making you feel crazy. But you can outthink them. And thinking is your specialty, isn't it? He slid a manila file across his polished desk toward me. Let's adjust your will. Carefully. Strategically. I didn't understand his full meaning yet. The plan was still forming, pieces moving into place like chess moves. But I trusted this man who'd protected my husband's interests for decades. Reynolds smiled, and it wasn't kind. It was tactical. We're going to give Alan exactly what he wants, he said. Right up until we don't. I went home and became an actress worthy of awards. I cried in Alan's arms, apologized for being paranoid and suspicious. I'm so sorry, I whispered against his chest, forcing out tears. You've been nothing but wonderful. I don't know what's wrong with me. I think grief is making me crazy. Alan stroked my hair with practiced gentleness. It's just stress, darling. Grief does strange things to the mind. Let me handle everything. You just rest and heal. His voice dripped with false concern, with barely hidden satisfaction. He thought I'd surrendered completely, thought he'd won. I let him believe it. I made myself small, confused, dependent. And while I played the helpless widow, my mind worked like a machine, calculating every move ahead. Let him think I was weak. Weakness makes people careless. And careless people make fatal mistakes. Reynolds drafted a new will with the precision of a surgeon cutting exactly where it matters. On paper, it looked like Alan's wildest dream come true. Everything I owned would pass to him upon my death. The house, the savings, the investments, every single asset with my name attached. But what Alan would never see, never know until too late, was the second clause buried in careful legal language. The moment the will was read publicly, all assets would immediately transfer into an irrevocable trust controlled by my children. Alan would have nothing, not a penny, not a shingle from the roof. Reynolds called it a performance for an audience of one. I called it justice wrapped in legal paper. We filed the paperwork quietly, witnesses signing in Reynolds' office. The trap was set perfectly. Now we just needed Alan to walk into it willingly. This is getting intense. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how Maggie turns the tables on this con man. Asterisk, asterisk. Alan insisted we elope to the coast. Simpler, he said, eyes gleaming. More romantic.
Just us and the ocean, Maggie.
No fuss, no family drama. I agreed and paid for everything, the dress, the travel, the beachfront hotel, with the view he requested. Alan hummed during the entire drive, practically vibrating with anticipation. He could almost taste the money, almost feel the house deed in his greedy hands. During the ceremony, waves crashing behind us, Alan slipped a ring onto my finger. I looked down, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my late husband's wedding band, the one Alan claimed he'd taken to resize. He'd kept it all along, probably planning to pawn it the day after I died. You kept it safe, I said softly, forcing my voice to stay steady. Alan didn't even flinch, didn't acknowledge the lie hanging between us. That night in our hotel room, ocean sounds drifting through the open window, I handed Alan a small sealed envelope. For you, I said, voice sweet as poisoned honey. In case something ever happens to me. Instructions for my will, bank accounts, everything important. I want you to have it all, Alan. You've made me so happy. Alan took the envelope with trembling hands, but not from emotion. From eagerness. From barely contained greed glittering in his eyes. He kissed my forehead gently, tenderly, like a husband should. But I felt nothing except cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. The envelope contained nothing important, just a decoy, a prop in the play we were performing. Alan tucked it in his jacket pocket like treasure. Poor fool. He had no idea the real performance hadn't even started yet. A few weeks later, I collapsed at breakfast. I'd practiced the fall, timed it perfectly down to the second. Alan was pouring coffee when I grabbed the table, gasped dramatically, and crumpled to the floor. His face went pale, but not from worry. From calculation. From wondering if this was finally it, finally time to cash in his investment. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing through our quiet neighborhood. As paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher, I grabbed the young nurse's hand and whispered urgently, "Call Reynolds. Tell him it's happening now." She nodded, understanding something important was at play. Alan rode in the ambulance, holding my other hand, his face arranged into perfect concern. But his free hand kept checking his phone, probably calculating account balances, probably planning his next moves. He didn't know my collapse was timed perfectly. While I lay in observation, pretending to be unconscious, Alan made his move exactly as we'd predicted. He rushed to the bank the moment visiting hours ended and tried cleaning out the joint account.
$52,000.
Everything left from my life's savings. The teller processed his withdrawal request, typed into her computer, and then her expression changed completely. "I'm sorry, sir. There's a legal hold on this account. I can't release any funds." Alan's face flushed deep red.
What?
"That's impossible. I'm her husband. That's my money." But the bank manager appeared, polite but absolutely firm. "There's a court order, Mr. Brooks. Filed 2 days ago." Alan didn't understand. He couldn't grasp that my collapse had been perfectly timed, right after Reynolds filed emergency protections. The net was closing around him, and he still thought he was the hunter. Alan stormed into the hospital the next morning, demanding updates from every nurse, every doctor, from anyone who'd listened to his angry voice. "Where's my wife? What's her condition? I need to see her right now. I have rights." His voice echoed down the sterile hallway, drawing stares from other visitors. The head nurse checked her computer screen and looked up with professional neutrality. "I'm sorry, sir. You're not on her contact list. I can't release any information." Alan's face went from red to purple with rage. "I'm her husband. We're married. You can't keep me from her." But the nurse just shook her head slowly. "According to our records, her medical power of attorney was changed 3 days ago. You're not authorized." Alan didn't realize that while he'd been planning his theft, I'd been busy erasing him from every legal document that mattered. 2 weeks later, the local newspaper carried a small death notice in the obituary section. Margaret and Collins, beloved mother and grandmother, passed peacefully, surrounded by family. Private ceremony held. Alan read it 3 times, hands shaking with what looked like grief, but was actually excitement. Then he called Reynolds' office. "When's the will reading?" he asked, trying to sound appropriately grief-stricken. "I need to handle her final affairs." Reynolds scheduled it for the following Monday at 10 in the morning. Alan arrived dressed in black, crocodile tears glistening in his practiced eyes. He played the devastated widower perfectly, trembling hands, sad smiles, distant stares out the window. Reynolds greeted him politely, showed him to the conference room, and offered condolences that meant absolutely nothing. 2 other people sat waiting, my daughter and son, both watching Alan with cold, knowing eyes. He nodded at them, pretending to share their grief. The fool actually thought he'd won. Reynolds opened the will with practiced formality, reading in his measured attorney voice that filled the quiet room. The first lines made Alan's heart soar with victory. "To my husband, Alan Brooks, I leave all my worldly possessions, my home at 247 Oak Street, my savings accounts, my investments, everything I own in this world." Alan couldn't hide his smirk. He nodded solemnly, but inside, he was celebrating wildly. Everything. The house alone was worth $300,000. Plus savings, plus my late husband's life insurance that still had my name on it. He'd hit the jackpot. My children sat frozen across the table, faces unreadable as stone. Alan felt their eyes boring into him, but didn't care anymore. He'd won. He'd actually pulled it off. The months of patience, of playing loving husband, had finally paid off gloriously. Or so he thought for exactly 10 more seconds. However, Reynolds continued, his voice steady and cold as winter ice. "Upon execution of this will, all assets shall be immediately transferred to the Margaret Foundation, a charitable trust under the care of my children, established in memory of my late husband." The room went silent as a grave. Alan's smile faltered, twisted, died completely on his face.
What?
That's not right. That's not what she told me." His voice cracked with desperation, with panic flooding through him. Reynolds looked at him with something like pity mixed with disgust. "I assure you, this is Mrs. Collins's legally binding will, properly witnessed and notarized." Then Reynolds reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, different from the one I'd given Alan on our wedding night. "She also left you this," Reynolds said, sliding it across the polished table. Alan's hands shook violently as he tore it open. Inside, in my distinctive handwriting on cream-colored stationery, was a letter. Alan read it aloud without meaning to, his voice barely a whisper. "Dear Alan, you thought love made me blind. It made me patient. Every penny you took was documented, insured, and traced. Every lie was recorded. Every theft was witnessed. You'll find nothing left but your own reflection in the mirror, and I hope it haunts you forever." It was signed simply, M. Alan's hands dropped to his lap, the letter fluttering to the table like a dying bird. My children watched him with satisfaction written clearly across their faces. "She knew," my daughter said quietly, voice filled with pride. "She knew from the very beginning what you were." Alan couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Everything he'd planned, everything he'd worked for, gone. Worse than gone. Turned against him like a weapon. Reynolds wasn't finished delivering blows. He pulled out another document, this one official with government seals stamped across it. "I should also inform you, Mr. Brooks, that your marriage license was never officially filed with the county." Mrs. Collins instructed the clerk to hold it for verification. Verification that never came. Alan's face went white as paper, all blood draining away. "What does that mean?" he whispered hoarsely. Reynolds smiled, and it wasn't friendly at all. "It means you have no spousal rights whatsoever. No legal claim to her property, her assets, or her estate. In the eyes of the law, you're simply a man who lived with Mrs. Collins for a brief period. Nothing more." Alan's world collapsed completely around him. No marriage meant no inheritance. No rights. No claims to anything. He was, legally speaking, just a con man who'd stolen from a widow. And everyone in this room knew it now. Reynolds handed a thick folder to the 2 police officers who'd been waiting patiently outside the conference room. They entered quietly, faces professional and hard as stone. This contains complete documentation of fraud, forgery, and identity theft, Reynolds explained calmly. The missing funds have been traced to an offshore account in Mr. Brooks's name. Mrs. Collins's jewelry was located at 3 different pawn shops across 2 counties. Her debit card was used for purchases at casinos and luxury hotels while she believed herself married. Alan stood frozen as one officer read him his rights in a monotone voice. "You set me up," he whispered, staring at Reynolds with hatred burning in his eyes. "She set me up from the beginning." Reynolds shook his head slowly. "No, Mr. Brooks. She protected herself. There's a significant difference. You set yourself up the moment you decided to target a grieving widow. We simply documented your crimes and waited patiently for you to finish committing them." The handcuffs clicked around Alan's wrists with a sound like justice. Then the conference room door opened, and Maggie walked in.
Alive.
Healthy. Smiling. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alan's face went through every emotion: shock, confusion, disbelief, rage, settling finally on pure terror. You died," he stammered. "The newspaper. The funeral." Maggie sat down gracefully, folding her hands on the table like she was at a casual lunch. "Doctors make mistakes sometimes," she said sweetly. "Apparently, I had a pulse after all. Funny how that works." Alan looked at Reynolds, at the police, at Maggie's children, desperately seeking an ally. He found none. "But why?" he whispered. Maggie's smile never wavered. "Because I needed you to show everyone exactly who you are. And you did. Perfectly." The police led him away, still stammering, still trying to understand how he'd been beaten. At the door, Alan turned back one last time. His face was red with rage, with humiliation, with the horrible realization that he'd been played from the very beginning. "After everything we had," he shouted, voice breaking. "You destroyed everything we had together." Maggie stood, walked to where he stood in handcuffs, and spoke quietly so only he could hear. "Alan, you keep saying everything we had. But we never had anything. All you ever had was access. Access to my home, my accounts, my trust. And I took that access away the moment I realized what you were." She stepped back, letting the officers guide him toward the door. "The only thing you ever truly had," she called after him, "was an opportunity to be honest. And you chose theft instead." The door closed behind him with finality, and Maggie sat back down to sign the foundation paperwork that would help other widows avoid the trap she'd almost fallen into. Months later, Maggie hosted a garden brunch for the Margaret Foundation's first scholarship recipients. 12 women sat around tables decorated with flowers, sharing stories of the companion scams they'd survived. Maggie moved among them, pouring tea, offering comfort, listening to pain she understood deeply. Someone asked the question that lingered in the air. "Will you ever love again, Maggie?" After everything that happened. Maggie paused, watching sunlight glint off her teacup, making the liquid shimmer like gold. She thought about trust and betrayal, about loneliness and wisdom, about the price of second chances. Finally, she smiled, not the desperate smile of a lonely widow, but the knowing smile of a woman who'd reclaimed her power. "Of course I will," she said, her voice carrying across the garden. "But this time, I'll check the paperwork first. And I'll trust my daughter when she tells me something's wrong. And I'll remember that love doesn't ask you to surrender everything. Only thieves do that." The women around her nodded, understanding blooming on their faces. Maggie raised her teacup. "To wisdom earned the hard way," she toasted. And 12 voices echoed back. "To wisdom."